Hello, everyone. Before we officially start, I just want to tell you that we have interpretation today. You only need to click on interpretation.
Bonjour à tous. I would like to remind you all that we have English-French interpretation. You only need to click the interpretation option on Zoom. Il vous suffit de cliquer.
Hello, everyone. In the name of global freedom of expression, I have the pleasure to welcome you to the launching of this global case law database in French. And we want to explore more about Internet shutdown. I am Anderson Dirossi. I'm a legal and program consultant at Global Freedom of Expression, and I'm consultant and advisor at GFOE, and I have the pleasure to motivate this webinar with Senegal as well. And we want to launch this global case law database in French language. You can see everything on our website. And I would like to take this opportunity now to invite you to the next webinar on the 20th of March, and will be of uh, international freedom of law. So our Global Freedom of Expression is an initiative that was founded in 2014 by Lizzie Bollinger, President Emeritus and State Law Professor of Columbia University. It brings international experts and activists together to provide quick, easy, and reliable access to the best national and international standards to protect free expression, as well as to highlight legal development in international and national courts. It actually hosts analysis of more than 2,000 cases from other 130 countries to reach as many regions as possible. We have versions of the database available in Spanish and Arabic, and translation of French is about 100 cases and is absolutely available, and has information on anything on freedom of expression throughout the world. On top of other cases, we have more cases every month which are added. The database has translations of 6 documents of a special collection on first, on these internet shutdowns in international law, and case law on alumni, and the African system for human and people rights, and the American system of law, and the Great Chamber of Human Law, right? So this collection about case law on freedom of expression gives a global perspective of some judicial decisions which were adopted by international and national courts on relevant case on freedom of expression. The vast database in French, and all these webinars are available thanks to the support of the UNESCO multi-donor program on freedom of expression and safety of journalists, and the Cyrilla Collaborative, with funding from the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law of Strathmore University, Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm very thankful for all their support. This webinar will be 1 hour long and will be open to the public domain throughout the world. The conversation will be live streamlined on YouTube for global freedom of expression. There will be a time for questions at the end if you wish to ask questions. Therefore, you can use as well the chat function. So welcome again to everybody. I will give the floor to Aisha Dabo, who is the co-founder and coordination AfricTivistes, and she will moderate the session today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anderson, for your introduction and presentation. Thank you to present the French version for this case law database. I'm really excited to moderate this first webinar about this launch of the French language global case law database. This is an important milestone in our journey, and this is the start for us of a series that we are well organized by the Article 19 of Senegal Art Africa of Western University of Columbia. Today we have two speakers. First, it will be Joan Barata, who is the Senior Legal Fellow at Justitia's Future Free Speech Project. He works on freedom of expression, media regulation, intermediary liability issues. He's fellow of the program on platform regulation at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center. He has published a large number of articles and books on this subject, and his work led him to most regions of the world, and he's very involved in projects with international organizations such as UNESCO, the Council of Europe, the Organization of American States, or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, where he was the principal advisor to the representative on media freedom. And Joan has also experience as a regulator, as he held the position of Secretary General of the Audiovisual Council of Catalonia in Spain, and was member of the Permanent Secretariat of the Mediterranean Network of Regulatory Authorities. Joan, welcome. Now I'm going to introduce Felicia Anthonio, a great sister. She's the hashtag Keep It On campaign manager at Access Now, which is a global campaign of over 300 organizations that fight against internet shutdowns. She has authored and co-authored several publications on internet shutdowns, featured on Access Now, Yale University, CIPESA, and Bloomsbury Collections website. Felicia hosted the Kill Switch podcast and was featured on the shutdown documentary by BBC World Service. Felicia is advisory council member of the US-based Open Technology Fund, OTF, and a board member of the World Expression Forum in Norway. As well, since 2019, she actually worked as a program associate, press freedom and free speech advocate at the Media Foundation for West Africa, where she coordinated the African Freedom of Expression Exchange. Thank you, Felicia, for being with us today. And I will start with Joan, who will intervene for about 20 minutes and who will present his contribution in the special collection of the case law. Is going to give us an overview of the main elements of this document with a focus on case law. So, Joan, I'll give you the floor right now. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be among you today and among experts, among activists in terms of internet shutdown. This is a very important discussion, and unfortunately, this discussion remains very relevant in many countries of the world. Today, I will present, as it's been already said, my contribution. I have authored this paper with as well my colleague Andre Richter, professor in Bratislava, and we work together with Andre Richter on this collection. And today we're talking about therefore this international problems, the internet shutdowns. What about the freedom of expression on the internet? What about the protection of the human rights in the digital world? It is obvious that without internet, without sufficient quality, there is no meaning, there is no sense to talk about other questions. Without the internet, there is no right to the digital. There is no right online. You know, there is no sense to talk about regulation of platforms, etc. This is absolutely basic and fundamental. So our contribution is based on two parts, actually. The first part is focused on the question of the international shutdowns in international law, especially on the basis of legal text, but also on the basis of international standards and various documents from international organizations. And the second part, we focus on the most important case law in this matter. When it comes to international law, in several documents, we find the idea that internet does facilitate the exercise of human rights. Generally speaking, the political right, the political participation, the civil rights, and also social rights, economic rights, and the right to communication and health. This has become a very important factor to reach the plenitude of the exercise of such rights. On the other hand, in international documents, we find references on the fact that internationally internet shutdowns that prevent the validity and the efficacy of the right of freedoms, of freedom of expression when it comes to information. And as well, in international documents, you find that when there are internet shutdowns, normally this is an indicator of a situation of deterioration of human rights in general. Governments cut the internet in order to protect public safety and the public order. But truly, in most cases, when there's an internet shutdown, there are also cases of violation of human rights from these government authorities. So, of course, there's always an association with these two phenomena. And also, in international documents, there's always reference to the need to guarantee the universal access for all citizens. This access should be sufficient and it should be of quality. And you find that, for example, in the UN documents, you've got the guidelines, which is very recent from the UNESCO on governance of digital platforms where you find guidance which is very precise on the need to guarantee the internet access. In any case, you do not find directly recognized in international documents, in legal documents, a recognition or an establishment of a right to the internet. So far, the legal international documents are not very clear. In any case, case law and international documents try to establish this link between the need to guarantee a universal access to the internet and the obligation of states to protect this fundamental right. So therefore, here, we need, as usual, from the legal point of view, we need to consider what has been consecrated when it comes to protection of the freedom of expression and consideration of the limitation of freedom. There is a test which has three parts. It's a three-part test, indeed. And we need to remind that the three-part test establishes that there are limitations to freedom, but they must respect three principles. First of all, it has to be clearly established by law. So it needs to protect, you know, the purpose and the restriction is to protect a legitimate interest and the principle of the necessity of proportionality. Therefore, the restrictions can be necessary in order to protect, of course, the public interest, to protect the rights, but it has to be proportionate. I mean, it's not acceptable to introduce restrictions that could be beyond what is necessary in order to protect the freedom of expression. It should not be too excessive, actually, in order to protect public interest in such conceptual context. It's difficult to imagine a case where a decision to shut down the internet can actually satisfy these three facets, especially when it comes to necessity and proportionality. It's difficult to think that with all the measures that a government can take, for example, to avoid such content, to completely cut the internet, and it should be a reasonable decision, you know. For example, so that they shouldn't have a massive and excessive impact on freedom of expression. Therefore, there is no international document that clearly states that internet shutdowns are a violation to human rights. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to find a case where a government decision or a regulator to cut internet shutdown can be compatible and can actually satisfy these three-part test. Can it be actually legal, legitimate, and proportionate when it comes to restrictions? So this is our analysis when it comes to the international law. When we look at case law, it's not easy to actually find many cases in this matter, or in any case to find useful cases to see, what is actually the definition of law. Um, the in the human rights, when it comes to human rights, therefore, we haven't had any case for the European Court of Human Rights, but it hasn't been any complete shutdown of the internet. But there are cases where the European Court of Human Rights have analyzed some decisions of governments, for example, Russia, who decided to completely block access to software, access to a website, access to service, to Google sites, for example, for Turkey. And the European Court of Human Rights has always stated that this has always a massive impact on the freedom of expression, and such restrictive decisions are not acceptable by the European Court. In any case, there are a couple of interesting decisions, not in regional court, but sub-regional court in Africa, especially the ECOWAS court, two cases actually about Togo, one case for Togo and one for Nigeria. For Togo, it was a internet shutdown for Togo, and for the other one, it was the Twitter cut in Nigeria. So the ECOWAS court has an exercise which is quite interesting because it does not recognize the right of access of internet shutdown as a fundamental right, but it makes a connection. There's a direct link between internet and freedom of expression. So limitation of the freedom or access of internet means or implies in a derivative way that it limits the freedom of expression. And for this reason, we need to give this type of measures with the three-part test that I already talked about. And the court, ECOWAS court, stated that these measures in Togo and Nigeria did not respect, you know, the necessity and the proportionality. These decisions are very important. At the national level, the most decisions can be found in India, especially because the the test of necessity or proportionality are part of the legal system of India, actually. For example, in the decision of Ahmedabad in India, the decision to cut the internet was on basis of necessity and proportionality. Okay. And therefore, it was okay to do that. There were other courts as well. Other courts followed in several parts this type of test to satisfy the test. And we found other very interesting decisions which were inspired, you know, for example, by the Supreme Court of India. In Indonesia as well, in other countries, there are some decisions which were inspired by the Indian case law, actually, and this has been considered from the point of view of case law at the national level as relevant in several regions of the world. In any case, even for case law of such courts, we cannot find any references generally for international law. Even the principle of proportionality is used as a constitutional principle at the national level, but it's very rare beyond the regional court or sub-regional courts to find references of international standards in the national law. As well, you can find in several countries, such in Russia, cases, for example, where the judge does not dare to contradict the decision of the government, especially the conclusion of the governments in terms of security, because there were problems of security which needed actually to establish an internet shutdown. Usually, there's a case where the court in Egypt, for example, decide to say, listen, the government has the capacity to decide when there is a risk in terms of national security. And if the government has stated there is a risk, therefore, we cannot say anything as a court. There are other cases where the decision is about competence. For example, there is a decision from a regional government that has been adopted by a federal government as well. So the case law for this is about a national law, but it's not about human rights. So there are very interesting elements when it comes to the international law for the shutdown internet. Some regional courts, some sub-regional courts can analyze some case laws in terms of internet shutdowns, but there's still a lot of work to do because, as I already said, at the national level, the decisions in terms of internet shutdown does not have a lot of quality, although there are some exceptions, and the presence of international standards for the reasoning of the court is not excessive. With this, in any case, it's very important to have this type of conversation because I think in the legal community, there is a lot still to discuss. There's a lot of things to understand. And as I already said, the internet access is very important when we talk about rights in the digital world. And I encourage to continue this conversation, not only today, but in the political world, in the world of regulations. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joanne, so much for your presentation. And it's really interesting. This is your contribution for the special collection, and this is available in French in the database. And now I am going to turn to Felicia, who is going to talk about the nature of internet shutdowns in Africa, and especially about how does it happen, these internet shutdowns, and how they used to violate rights. And she will finish with recommendations at the end. So, Felicia, I give you the floor right now.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you so much, Joanne, for the overview. I feel like I don't have anything to discuss, but I'll try and address some of the missing parts. So as Aisha said, I am going to highlight the findings of the Keep It On campaign with regards to internet shutdowns and tying it to evidence on the ground with regards to how we are seeing governments use shutdowns to suppress human rights across the globe, but my focus will be in Africa. So first of all, for those who are not familiar with the Keep It On campaign or coalition, this is a global coalition of over 330 organizations around the world, and it was formed in 2016 and is dedicated to fighting internet shutdowns around the world. We use diverse strategies, and so I'm going to first of all highlight what we mean by an internet shutdown under our advocacy, and this refers to the intentional disruption of internet or electronic communications, rendering them inaccessible or effectively unusable for a specific population or within a location. And it's often to exert control over the flow of information. Our monitoring shows that governments are the ones or the major perpetrators of internet shutdowns globally. Secondly, the trends we've observed in Africa include the following. Internet shutdowns are increasingly becoming part of government information control playbook. And we've also seen evidence of shutdowns being used in both democratic and autocratic regimes. Between 2016 to June 2023, we've documented at least 1,118 incidents of shutdowns in 76 countries around the world. The timeline is June 2023 because we are currently finalizing the annual report for 2023, which will be out soon, and we'll have more details about the trends and developments we've observed in 2023. Out of these shutdowns, at least 146 of these shutdowns happened in 37 countries. And if you look at the number of countries in Africa, it shows that it's more than a half or almost a half of the total number of countries that have disrupted internet access within that period. And this underscores the fact that internet shutdowns are spreading in the region and becoming an issue of concern for all of us that work to defend human rights. In terms of what causes the shutdowns, so we usually, obviously governments are the ones that impose these shutdowns, but they normally tie them to incidents happening on the ground, like protests, elections, conflict, or military coup d'etats to disrupt internet access. And so we've seen protests being the highest when it comes to a trigger for internet shutdowns in Africa. Elections have also shown to be a major cause of shutdowns in the region. And then we've seen incidents of internet disruptions also being used during conflict situations. And then weaponizing internet shutdowns. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Felicia.
Okay. All right. My headphones are misbehaving. All right. Okay. And we've also seen an increased use of mobile internet shutdown. Okay, we've seen an increase of the use of mobile internet shutdown and social media blackouts in the region as well. And then, as I said, it's lasting longer. Shutdowns are spreading across the region and are affecting more and more people across the region. And unfortunately, we continue to see new countries using this act of repression during national crisis moments. Why do governments shut down the internet? Governments continue to use the following mundane excuses to cut off people during crisis. They would normally cite the need to ensure national security and public order, to prevent the spread of hateful and subversive information, as in the case of Senegal. That is the excuse the government has used to disrupt internet access since last year and this year when the elections were postponed and there were protests or massive protests in the country against the postponement. And the government went ahead to shut down internet access, citing these excuses to prevent hateful and the spread of hateful and subversive information. Our monitoring shows that when you shut down the internet, you rather put people's lives in danger. You also amplify the spread of misinformation because you restrict people's access to various sources of information to verify the information that is out there. And then we've also seen governments shut down the internet during exams, allegedly to prevent cheating. And last year in Kenya, unfortunately for the first time, we saw the authorities disrupt access to Telegram whenever examinations were taking place. And then in northern Nigeria, the authorities shut down the internet, claiming that it was to fight banditry in the region. So you can see that governments continue to cite either the old excuses or try to come up with unjustifiable reasons to disrupt internet access during crisis moments. In 2024 already, we've seen shutdowns happening in Sudan, in Comoros, as well as in Chad and Senegal. Unfortunately, in other parts of the world, we've also seen governments already using internet disruptions as a tool against its own people. Since our 2023 report is not ready, I also put this to highlight what we saw the previous year in 2022, where we documented 9 shutdowns in 7 countries in the region. And I can say this number would increase significantly in our 2023 reports, given the incidents of shutdowns we've documented we documented in 2023. One spoke about the various jurisprudence protecting the rights that internet shutdowns violate. And so I've also included some regional frameworks like the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, as well as the Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information, which was launched in 2019. And then also the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has a resolution since 2016 that also denounced the use of internet shutdowns. And so there are frameworks that condemn governments that disrupt internet access in the region. With one thing that we've seen is that internet shutdowns, aside from the fact that they violate human rights, they also widen the digital divide and enable those who are already in power to evade accountability for human rights violations that happen during internet shutdowns. And we've seen evidence of internet increased human rights abuses taking place whenever the internet is shut down in different parts of the world. And then in general, internet shutdowns put people's lives in danger. As you saw, I highlighted the triggers as protests and even conflict situations. And so once you disrupt internet access during these key national moments, you are putting people in danger because they cannot access life-saving information to be able to, for instance, if there's fighting in area B, how do you find the safest route to get to the house if the internet is disrupted? We've also seen a most recent case in Pakistan when the internet was disrupted on elections day, how people couldn't access hailing services like Uber and other platforms to be able to find their polling stations. And then one of the other impacts is that it's cost national economies billions of dollars. And so you would wonder why government so impose these shutdowns. Just a few more examples when it comes to how the internet shutdowns impact elections and other democratic tenets. We have the fact that it prevents the free flow of information and muzzles freedom of expression and prevents exercise of freedom of assembly rights. It also blocks people from actively engaging in the democratic processes, which could include elections or referendum. And it will prevent them, of course, from being able to scrutinize the various policies put forward by political candidates. And it also impacts their ability to make informed decisions about who to vote for. Elections, particularly in growing democracies, are a critical time of transition, and active citizen participation contributes enormously to a credible and transparent outcome. And so once you disrupt people's access to these channels, they wouldn't be able to scrutinize the electoral process. We've also seen how internet shutdowns impact journalists, human rights defenders, election observers during electoral processes. And once this happens, it interferes with the ability to effectively monitor the electoral process, thereby casting doubt on the transparency, credibility, and fairness of the election outcome. And an example is Gabon. In August last year, during elections, prior to elections, the government blocked, or there was the lack of international observers in the country. And then the government also started blocking foreign media from getting into the country or covering the elections. And then on elections day, we saw the government disrupt internet access. It resulted in delays in announcing the electoral results. And not unsurprisingly, the sitting president at the time was announced as the winner of the 2023 elections, until the military overthrew the government and reinstated internet access in the country. And so if that hadn't happened, we would see an extension of the incumbent's term, thanks to the various controls that they've put in place. And of course, everybody would doubt the outcome of the election. We saw the opposition criticizing the outcome of the elections, and then the military even announced these election results in 2023. And there's research by CPESA that shows that governments who want to stay in power are more likely to impose internet shutdowns at times that favor them. And aside Gabon, examples have been documented in Uganda and other places like Cameroon. All right. I'm going to highlight the impact of shutdowns also during protests, which I've talked about a bit, but I'll focus more on during conflict situations. And you would all agree with me that when the internet is shut down during this high tension moment, it's or we all have seen how critical internet access is during these high tension moments. And so once that is disrupted, it becomes a matter of life and death. As I explained earlier about conflict happening and you not being able to have access to the internet to find safe routes to get home or to get to safety. There's also been evidence of how internet shutdowns worsen the delivery of humanitarian aid and emergency services to affected populations, and also how it affects critical infrastructure or services like healthcare, education, and business during conflict. And we've documented this evidence in Ethiopia's Tigray region, and where the internet was disrupted for over 2 years. And then currently there's an ongoing internet shutdown in the Amhara region since April 2023, where authorities shut down access to the internet, and there's ongoing conflict between the federal army and the Amhara militia. So we've also seen how critical infrastructure like these have been affected, and how people have been also denied opportunity to communicate with their families and provide the necessary support they need during these difficult moments. I intentionally put this at this section to give us some hope, because yes, a lot is happening when it comes to internet shutdowns in the region, but it's also important for us to note that some successes, as I call them in this case, have been documented in the region. One referenced the Twitter blocking in Nigeria and the ECOWAS ruling regarding that blocking. And so it's encouraging to see that in 2023, prior to elections, the Nigerian Communications Commission did assure the people of Nigeria that the government was not going to impose internet shutdowns during the elections. And then Sierra Leone, which had also previously disrupted internet access in 2022, committed to keeping the internet on during private engagements we had with some of the stakeholders. And indeed, the internet was kept on throughout the electoral process. The Democratic Republic of Congo, if you all remember some years ago, I think between 2016 and 2019, we saw how authorities weaponized or imposed internet shutdowns during elections, protests in the country. And so it was encouraging to see that ahead of the 2023 elections in December, the government publicly committed to keeping the internet, keeping internet access open and secure for everyone in the country. And so these are some of the examples that we've documented with regards to when it comes to, can you hear me? Okay, when it comes to advocating against internet shutdowns. And so we've also increasingly moved towards demanding commitments from governments and actors that disrupt internet access to publicly make such commitments so we can hold them accountable. And we mentioned litigation and how successful that has been. So once we have these open or public commitments, we can use that to support our cases in the fight against internet shutdowns. And then I also included some ways, I'm sure the participants would want to know more about the campaign or would be interested in supporting the campaign. And so these are some of the ways that you can support. If you've experienced an internet shutdown, feel free to reach out for us to highlight the impact that or how that internet shutdown affected you. If you suspect an unusual slowness in your internet connectivity, contact other people to check if it's the same for them, and then reach out to the ISPs and ask them what is going on with your internet access. And sometimes we've seen cases where the internet or governments have ordered ISPs to shut down the internet, but there is no public communication regarding that. And so people are left to wonder why internet access is unusually slow or even inaccessible. And so you need to ask questions when these things happen. And then if you think there is a risk of a shutdown in your country or region or wherever you find yourself, you can escalate that to the Keep It On community. And then we'll be able to amplify it and raise awareness and also call out authorities not to even implement the shutdown in the first place. Or if it's implemented, we would definitely push for restoration of internet access. And then for us, civil society organizations, we both local and international, it's important for us to continue to advocate for more resources so we can continue to highlight the threats and dangers of internet shutdowns and how they impact human rights around the world. Again, we've talked about litigation, and so leverage the existence of national and regional courts to fight internet shutdowns. We've seen successes in Togo and Nigeria, as well as Guinea, where the ECOWAS court has condemned the use of internet shutdowns. And then there is a recent case currently at the ECOWAS court where Aisha and her team, as well as Media Defense, litigating against the internet shutdowns that have happened in Senegal. And then, of course, ISPs have a responsibility to protect and respect our fundamental human rights. And so ask them or demand that they challenge shutdown orders in courts, where and also make sure that they are transparent about the shutdown orders they receive. I know, one, you mentioned sometimes how difficult it could be given the security situation in countries where they operate, but we also think they have a responsibility to do that. And this could even be discussed right from the beginning of signing contracts or licenses before you move into that particular country. Can you have some agreements around protecting citizens' rights during crisis moments, and up to what point can they push back against internet shutdowns? And then there are some more resources here for those who want to learn more about internet shutdowns and the Keep It On campaign. All right, thank you so much. And I would hand over back to you, Aisha. And I hope you've learned something new from this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia, for this very important information about internet shutdowns, especially in Africa. I can see a question in the chat, and I want to read it to you, actually. One of the participants asked, a citizen, Mr. Jean-Paul Corintiza, he asked, when you have an internet shutdown, can you be compensated financially and complain against the internet provider, because some businesses are victims of this internet shutdown? So is it possible for businesses or for citizens to be compensated financially by internet shutdown? I ask the question to Felicia and Joanne, please.
And an example I always use is in Sudan, where an individual took the telecom, I think Zain, to court for shutting down the internet, and the court did rule in favor of the individual. And then subsequently, the internet access was restored for all the Sudanese people. And so I think individuals can push and to also demand damages for shutting down the internet. I don't remember which case it was, but I'm not sure. Let me not speculate, but I think you can go to court as an individual to sue your telecom company because you have a contract with them. You pay for a service that they provide. And so once they breach that contract, you can take them to court. And we also know that, yes, indeed, businesses lose huge sums of money when it comes to the impact that internet shutdowns have on them. And I think, again, in Sudan, the consumer protection, that was the name of the company, I think Consumer Protection, I don't remember the full name. They also took the government to court for shutting down the internet. And again, it was ruled in favor of the people of Sudan. So I think Sudan has very interesting cases when it comes to litigation around internet shutdowns. And even though that hasn't stopped internet shutdowns from happening, it's really, I think, has encouraged other people in different parts of the region to turn to litigation in the fight against shutdowns. But yes, I think it's time we ask for companies to pay damages to individuals that are affected. But I will let Juan come in and maybe highlight more on that.
I fully agree with what has been said. It depends, of course, on the legal system at the national level. Normally, for most legal systems, they say that the government is accountable for damages because of the disruption of the internet, because of these government decisions. There is a responsibility when it comes from the governments, especially when the government decision has been stated as illegal. The other question is that the most interesting case is Sudan, and I did think of Sudan as an example. And indeed, when it comes to the internet providers' responsibility, liability, yes, there are cases where we can ask about these private actors, but there as well, sometimes these private actors can say, well, I have received an order from a regulator and I need to obey that. This is not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of the government or the legal regulator to do nothing else but obeying this order. This is what some internet providers say. It depends, but I fully agree in principle. The responsibility is political, the responsibility is legal and individual, And the internet shutdown has a massive economic impact. It's not only about human rights, but it's about the economic impact of the internet. Thank you very much. Yes, Joanne, just to say more, one of the participants asked, you did mention that the internet provider can say, oh, this is the government's fault. But they want to know, these participants, these internet provider, are they responsible if the government puts this order on? Can you talk more about that? Yes. Well, it's a legal principle. If a private business, obeys to the government's order and needs to follow this legal obligation, it's more difficult from a legal point of view to establish responsibility, because otherwise, when it comes to internet providers, they risk to have actually legal penalties, you know? If the internet providers say, no, I believe in freedom of expression, I resist against this order, the consequence will be very clear. It will be penalized, you know? So in this case, the responsibility belongs to the one who gave the decision to cut the internet. So this is the government's responsibility. Thank you, Juan. Oh, we got 4 minutes before we finally finish. I don't see any other questions, but I have a question for Felicia, and then a question for Juan, and then I will conclude. So, for Felicia, there is a question. What are the best practices and strategies on the continent that could be adopted in order to balance the concerns of public security, you know, and when it comes to expression of freedom and freedom of internet? Because the governments often say, yeah, there is a concern of public safety. This is what we've seen in Senegal, for example. So Felicia, are there better practices, better strategies that you could share for the participants here? And then I will turn to Joanne for the last question. Thank you, Felicia.
Uh, this is a very interesting question, but I think national security has always been an excuse for governments to restrict human rights. Like, it's even in the context of every other rights, governments think national security supersedes human rights. And so they would just violate human rights to protect national security. And you mentioned Senegal, and I think it's something I find really difficult to understand, that elections which are guaranteed in the constitution were scheduled to happen on a particular day. The people of Senegal woke up one day and the president decided to postpone the elections. This is just a reaction to what has happened in a democratic country, and it's valid that people would protest against such a decision. And so why would you go ahead to restrict the rights of the people, citing all kinds of excuses, when you could have respected their rights guaranteed by the Constitution to hold the elections as scheduled in the country? And so for us, I still think it's just an excuse for governments to restrict rights, and it's up to you and I to continue to highlight that these are just excuses. They don't resolve any crisis on the ground. It's just to further restrict human rights and to abuse people's rights. Yeah.
Thank you, Felicia. I'm going to just read a comment on the chat. Matumbai says, the internet providers must give priority to their own responsibilities in comes to respecting human rights. And according to UN rights, they must respect human rights. This is the responsibility to prevent or to mitigate any risk against human rights. Businesses should explore all these against internet shutdowns. Thank you, Matthew, for this contribution. Thank you, Felicia, for your contribution. And quickly, I'm going to turn to Joanne and ask, do you have any recommendations, Joanne? Politically, legal recommendations as well, to have less and less internet shutdowns. This is becoming like epidemics, this internet shutdown. Do you have any legal recommendations in order to improve the situation, in order to prevent the internet shutdowns? Because when we talk about to fight against human rights, government, in any case, shut down the internet. So what can we add to the lab to ensure that this will not happen? This is difficult to answer. In any case, for this comment, I agree with the comment of the participants. It's very hard in some contexts, and especially when the internet provider is, for example, a government agent, belongs to the state sometimes, this internet provider. I understand that, but it's not, so therefore it's not that easy for them to resist against the government and the regulators. But for recommendations, well, when you set up the law, you need to understand the impact of the internet shutdown, not only on human rights, but on the capacity for the government to communicate with their own citizens and on the national economy and on the image of the governments as well. So even if, thanks to the internet shutdown, the government can benefit of it, I think that overall, it is not a benefit, a positive benefit for the governments, and they need to be aware of that. There is no magical potion or magical formula for this, but we need to understand the human rights and to understand the 3 tests I've already talked about. This is very, very important. Thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much, Felicia, for your interventions. We carry on the discussion on internet shutdown and on the legal framework, of course, and on this the French database that has been launched today with this first webinar. Thank you so much to all the participants for this first session of the series, and that's organized by Article 19 Senegal and Columbia University. There will be another session in March. I'm going to give the floor back to Anderson. It was a pleasure for me to moderate this discussion with Felicia and with Joanne. I give the floor back to Anderson. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you to Joanne. Thank you to Felicia for their precious contribution. And thank you to the participants for their commitment and the questions. So do not forget that the video will be published on the GFOE website. And on the 20th of March, we talk about another topic on the 25th of March. And lastly, on the 2nd of April, on the freedom of expression in the African systems of human rights. So we will share the complete agenda in the chat soon. And lastly, I invite you to send your comments and your contributions to the database. You are absolutely welcome to share your comments and on the website as well. Thank you so much and bye-bye.